Dr. Rima Bonario writes and teaches about personal and planetary transformation. She is the co-creator of the 21-day transformative shadow work practice called the Q process. She is also co-author of Who Have You Come Here to Be? 101 Possibilities for Contemplation, a book and a deck card. Rima holds a doctorate in transformational psychology and works with individuals and groups through workshops and private coaching to surface and heal unresolved wounds and shift suboptimal behavior patterns. She also trains and certifies coaches, ministers, and healers to use the 21-day practice with their clients. Dr. Rima.
Thank you. So I did just complete my doctoral work last year, and the title of my dissertation, you know, the longer it is, the better it is, right? So the title of my dissertation was Developing Emotional Resiliency, the Effect of the 21-Day Q Process Intervention on Levels of Self-Compassion and Anxiety in Adults. And I was given the opportunity to present this at the ICEM conference, the International Society for Subtle Energy and Energy Medicine last year. And today I'm going to share a little bit about that, as well as go a little deeper into the work in how it becomes a path for emotional and spiritual intelligence. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the program, and then I'm going to share with you my research results. But I've decided, sort of after listening to the speakers here this morning and yesterday, that it might be best if I tell you a story first. So this is my family. My daughter Sophia and my husband Toby. She's 11 now. When I tell this story in the workshop, I usually use a picture of me with her when she was 5, because this occurred when she was 5. And it's an example of what the Q process can do for people once they've had a chance to get to a level of mastery. So here I am drying my daughter's hair with the hairdryer. We're in the bathroom, she's 5. And I don't know where I was, but every so often I just tap her in the head with the hairdryer. And after about the 4th time of bonking my beautiful child on the head with the hairdryer, she turns around and says to me, "Stop hitting me in the head with that hairdryer!" Just like that. And I said, yeah, she's a theater geek, so, you know, she's found her path. And I was sort of really shocked by that response. And because I had some level of mastery with the Q process, rather than giving in to the trigger, I became curious about why that was so shocking to me, that she would speak to me in that way, and all the reactions I was having. And as I got curious, I had the thought, what would happen to me if I spoke to my mother that way? And I had this flash of my mom smacking me on the head with the hairdryer and saying, "You think that hurts? Now that hurts." Which was also very shocking to experience. So then I became curious about those feelings and everything that was coming up as a result of having that flash. And I began wondering about my childhood, because like many people, my parents believed physical reinforcement was a great way to help me know when I was off the path. And so while I don't know for sure that happened, I know something like that would have happened if I'd spoken to my mom that way. So I began to think about that and what that meant for me, what kind of messages and beliefs I took on as a result of growing up in a house where I could be slapped or spanked or squeezed or poked or yelled at or whatever the case might be. And I got to a moment where, as I was working the process in my mind, I discovered a message that resonated with me so deeply that it just froze me. And the message was this: the people who love me hurt me. The people who love me hurt me. The people who love me hurt me. And I was just sort of, this happened in the space of, 60 seconds or less. And I knew, okay, I'm going to have to take this onto a worksheet, which is what we use in our mindfulness process. And I turned to my daughter right there and I said, "Sophia, oh honey, I am so sorry that I was hitting you with the hairdryer. I absolutely don't know what I was thinking, where I was. I didn't mean to hurt you. I never want to hurt you. And it is so right and good and perfect that you spoke up and you told me I was hurting you. I hope you will always do that because no one should hurt you. And that is not okay. And I am so sorry. Please forgive me. And I love you. Wow. You know, in that moment, that's the reaction that I wanted to bring. That was my higher self being there with her. Now later we had a conversation about how to speak up politely, but that was not what I wanted to reinforce. What I wanted for her to hear was that where she had a voice and it was appropriate for her to use that voice. So later I took it onto a worksheet, and as part of the workshop process I actually went back to a time in my growing up years. I won't go into that with any great depth, but I found a moment from my history where I learned not to speak up. And I did some work around shifting that pattern. And the purpose of all of the work we do in the Q process is really to drive us towards this end, to become a non-anxious presence. I love this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, that it isn't enough to talk about peace or believe in it, we have to work at it. We have to work at it. So we do this by befriending the shadow through the Q process practice. Here are a couple of ways, or 5 ways, that William Miller suggests we can get at the shadow. I would add typology to this by looking at typologies, enneagrams. Some of the work we did yesterday with the cafe helps us to see the shadow sides of our particular type. In the Q process, we're working mostly with uncovering projections and looking at our behavior. What do those 2 things tell us about our shadow? And they help us identify that. Our whole practice consists of a 6-hour workshop with bringing together all kinds of things you've already heard about over the course of our time together that Cindy works with as well. Then there is a 21-day practice, because people need practice. We need practice feeling compassion. We need practice feeling gratitude. We need practice noticing when our shadow qualities are up, and we need practice with how to choose something else, how to choose another way of responding. And then in addition to that, there are 3 group coaching sessions, and we do it in a group in part because what we're wanting to get at is that common humanity that Kristen Neff speaks about. There's so much power in small group work. Really, we're trying to help people understand this. You cannot see without you in the view. I mean, this poor guy's just trying to paint a landscape, right? This is us living life, trying to live life, and we cannot see without us in the view. We have to learn to navigate our own shadow material, our own imposter, I just love that, our own ego. We have to learn how to navigate past that, to see beyond our projections to what is really there. So we talk about the role of the conditioned self, the role of perception, and what I like to call the life lens or worldview, you know, all of those things put together. And we make the lens visible by teaching about the meaning-making apparatus that's underneath it all, that it's not something that's embedded in us, it is something we have. We do a subject-object transition there, Keegan's work, so that I have a meaning-making system, so I can interact with it. I can do something with it. I have a nervous system response that I can learn to do something with that. I have neural firing patterns, ego development, attachment theory, shadow material, all of that. I have that. That's not who I am. Those are things I have. And it's all about then self-awareness. We've been talking about, I love that piece of statistic that if you have self-awareness, you have a 50-50 chance of doing something with your own emotional content as opposed to a 4% chance. Outcomes we are looking for in the Q process: reimagining life as a less threatening experience. A lot of this work has come out of the New Thought community, and when we teach it in the New Thought community, we call it the art and practice of living with nothing and no one against you. More effective self-regulation in times of perceived threat. And in my study, I was looking at 2 key outcomes of increased self-compassion and decreased anxiety. And what I was curious about was what would happen with SQ. So I started out on the research opportunity using the State Trait Anxiety Inventory and Kristen Neff's Self-Compassion Scale, and then I pulled 3 skills out of the Spiritual Intelligence Assessment to look at. So here were my formal study results. State anxiety is how you're feeling in this exact moment. So the control group is in blue. They actually had a slight increase in their anxiety level, their state anxiety, when they were taking the pretest and when they were taking the post-test. However, the treatment group had a 23.7% drop in how anxious they were feeling at the moment they were taking the test from pre to post. But more interesting than that is trait anxiety, which is typically stable across a lifetime. It's how we perceive ourselves, how anxious we perceive ourselves to be in general. And you can see control group had no movement there. Treatment group had almost 20% drop in how anxious they said they were in general. After just 21 days, they had to do a minimum of 4 worksheets per week. They didn't even have to do all 7. We try to convince people they should do all 7, but rarely did they do all 7. And then in self-compassion, we need practice with self-compassion. Again, we heard from Pittman and others that self-compassion is the one thing that helps to heal the shadow. So suffering, for example, nothing is against us, including suffering. Suffering is a natural, normal part of the human experience. And you can see here that the treatment group had 19% increase was the actual number there in self-compassion. So how about the SQ data? What I did with the SQ data was I took my control group and I had them do a pre and post test and then hand scored it. And the 3 skills I looked at first was awareness of worldview. The top graph is the pre-test, the bottom graph is the post-test. Here's a comparison of the 2 together. The questions I saw that had the most change: I believe that my worldview is the only correct one. That'll pop you right out, right? After going through the workshop and working with the intervention, that had a big change. And then the 2 at level 5 that are behavioral, right? I stay calm and open-hearted even when someone says they disagree with my beliefs. People consider me reassuring and not pushy about my beliefs. Wow, pretty exciting there. Here was quadrant 1, self and self-awareness. Awareness of ego and higher self. Again, really big change there. You can see that it's a little hard to see, but that's combined. Here was, again, where the big changes came. I think there's a difference between the desires of my ego shadow and my higher self. That will pop a lot of people out. And then the other 2 were on level 3. I recognized situations and people that cause my ego or shadow to want to take charge. Got really clear about that using the 21-day process. I'm aware of the signals my body gives me when anger or fear is present. We do a lot of body stuff as well. That's a whole nother story. But anyway, then this one is keeping the higher self in charge. I felt the most excited about this result. And again, you can see I was totally blown away by the change that we saw here for skill 13. And here were where we saw the biggest adjustments. I know when I'm acting on the fear or anger of my ego or shadow self. When I act to fulfill the desires of my ego or shadow, I feel long-term satisfaction, right? That's one that trips people up. Well, of course I do. And then learning, well, no, maybe not. Maybe that's not really what's going to give me long-term satisfaction. And I know how to interrupt my ego shadow thoughts and put my higher self in charge of my thoughts, words, and actions. And that is an outcome that is practiced daily using this worksheet of slowing the process down so that they can see the trigger, name the emotions, look at the shadow quality that is present, and then uncover an unlimiting belief or a shadow belief, move into a place of compassion for oneself, then move into a place of gratitude for the trigger. I'm grateful this trigger happened because it's helping me see that I have this unconscious belief running without my permission all through my life. And then moving from that to what was the unmet need that was present when I was triggered, and what is the quality that I choose. We develop a cue card where they actually create some intention around how to notice their higher self. which quality from your higher self will support you in this situation. Take a moment to rewrite that in the present tense as though you had been on your cue card or in your higher self. How would that look? That's for the brain. And then take an authentic action that anchors your sense of that higher self quality. Go out and prove it to yourself that that's who you really are. Live the change. Act it and then become it. And then also make sure you're meeting your unmet need for yourself. And then we do a little affirmative process at the end. So the first 2 weeks we're working with the outer critic, and then the second week the inner critic, and then the final week what we're doing is going back into the past to find those moments where those shadow beliefs and messages got put in place in the first place, and we work to undo those complexes. So here were the changes in median scores, just so you can see, from a 3 to a 5, from a 2 to a 5, from a 3 to a 4, and then the percentage of increase. This is not, I couldn't do any statistical significance around standard deviation because there aren't normative numbers just yet for SQ21, but nice changes there. All about unleashing our spiritual superhero out into the world, right? So this is what my passion is in the world, and starting with myself and my own life. Becoming a non-anxious, compassionate presence and a force for good in the world. Thank you. Questions, yes.
What was the age range of the people who participated in the study?
We had I'm sorry, thank you. The question was, what was the age range of the folks that participated in the study? I had people from early 20s up to 70s, and I controlled for years of spiritual experience. So if people said they had 5 to 10 years, 0 to 10 years of spiritual experience, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, and beyond 30, and I made sure that the control group and the treatment group had an equal distribution of that. I also controlled. We had many more females than males, which is typical in a sort of I did a lot of recruiting in the Unity community. I did work with the Mankind Project people too, but it was just harder to get them. And so all those precious men, I made sure they were equally distributed. And then also, one of the limitations of the study was that there wasn't much diversity because of being in Overland Park, Kansas. It's just sort of a little bit reflective of the community. Yeah, Therese knows, she's giggling. And also what I'm curious about is how these results would hold up over time. So it'd be really nice to maybe get funding and do more research. So, and I didn't have handouts for you, but I'm happy to email this information and a summary of my research and any information you might be interested in about the Q process itself, whether that might be another tool you'd like to have in your toolbox. So on these 4 tables, there's just a little sheet for you to put your email on. I know it says join our newsletter, but I won't put you on my newsletter.
We'll put it on group site.
Excellent. Okay, and we'll pass it around that way. I'd love to give you a little bit more information. We have a certification group going on right now in this spring, and we travel in the fall. We usually try to go to the West Coast and the East Coast, but every spring we're up at Unity Village. Other questions? Yes?
What university are you finishing your doctorate?
I graduated last summer from Holos University Graduate Seminary, so I got ordained too. Oh, okay, wonderful. Yeah, it was a great place to bring the study of science and spirit together. Really nice. I'll give a plug for Holos University. I very much enjoyed doing my work there. Any other questions?
Rima, how large was the study group?
I'm sorry. How large was the study group? I had 54 people in my control and 45 people in my treatment group. Yeah, it was very good. I was very pleased with that. Yes?
Is the Q process, is it like train the trainer, train the coach? How does that?
Well, we do.
Anyone who,
We do a train the trainer program where we certify people to teach the workshop. There's a script and slides and all that, and to coach people through the 21-day practice. It's a self-reflective process because what we want ultimately is for people to have some capacity to do this for themselves in the moment. So after you've done it for a while on the worksheets, it becomes something you can sort of run through yourself in the moment. And people report that as they're going through the practice, they start to notice throughout the day, oh, I'm going to have to do a worksheet on that. And they start listing out all their what we call worksheet moments. And some people actually find the second time through is even deeper. So all of our people who go through certification, we encourage to do it twice. But I'd be happy to answer any questions about that another time. Yes?
Could you say what your summary was, your findings in a brief sentence?
Well, that doing shadow work in this... Yes, sorry. The question was, what is a summary of my findings? So the summary of my findings would be that doing shadow work with this particular tool decreases anxiety and increases self-compassion, and it looks as though it also has some impact on these particular skills from the spiritual intelligence assessment. Thank you.